Albert Einstein's cousin, or he's some kin to him, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, years ago, he came out with a strategy to sell things as far as advertising is concerned. And his strategy became so popular and he became so famous that everybody copied him. Everybody wanted to copy what he did. And one of the first projects that he proved himself on was a cigarette. It was called Virginia Slims. And back then, it wasn't really fashionable for women to smoke cigarettes. Now, I know it'd probably be hard to believe now, but we're talking years ago. Okay. And at that particular time, yeah, it was supposed to not be ladylike, as they called it, for a woman to smoke cigarettes. And so the cigarette company wanted a way to boost their sales and to get women to start smoking cigarettes. So they came up with a cigarette that was slim. It wasn't as the regular diameter of the average cigarette. They were slimmer. They were long and they were slim. And they would show them between a woman's two fingers, how well it fit, and they try to make it look sexy and all that. Well, his whole strategy was this. Prior to what he did, advertisers would try to put their product up and say, my product, which is product A, is better than product B. And these are the reasons why. Well, he killed all that. He said, no, don't even worry about trying to do that. We're not going to discuss how good the product is. We're not going to try to do any of that. What we're going to do is we're going to show people enjoying the product. Show people smiling and enjoying the product, because that would sell more. He's coming strictly from a psychological standpoint. And so that's what he did. And so, of course, no one cared if whether or not cigarette smoke at that particular time was linked to breast cancer. Nobody cared that there wasn't anything good about a cigarette, tobacco, and nicotine and tar and the whole nine. Nobody cared about all that. This was about this woman was going to get this cigarette, and she was going to be able to smoke in public and look fashionable while she was doing it, as opposed to not looking ladylike, like women were, stereotyped not to be when they had a regular cigarette hanging between their out of their mouth or between their fingers. So that's the way he made his. That was the ad campaign that they launched, and it worked like a charm. It worked like a charm. It was an overnight success. And once that happened, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's not a lot of creativity. There's a lot of parroting and there's a lot of copying, but there's not very much creativity in the world today. There really isn't. There never has been. Especially if something is working. If you have a business model that works, guarantee it's going to be copied at some point. It's going to be copied. And so that's what happened. And so fast forward to today, now what we're seeing? Now we're seeing commercials. And this used to blow my mind. I don't know about anybody else, but this used to absolutely blow my mind. You will see commercials on TV for prescription drugs. We've all seen them. And they're telling you in the disclaimer, and the disclaimer is only there, by the way, because of government. As much as people hate the government, and as much as people complain about government overreach, and particularly Democrats, they don't understand that the regulations that they put in are to protect us. If you don't have sense enough to understand that, then you really don't even deserve the protection that you're getting. Because that's the whole purpose of it. Well, that's the reason for the disclaimers being there for the cigarettes. And there's also disclaimers there for prescription drugs. And so the whole time the commercial's going on, and it's telling you, and you know, they'll even have it sometimes in writing, but you can hear the person talking in the background. You know, it causes depression. It can cause, you know, all types of other medical issues. And sometimes it even say that he can lead to could even lead to death. But the whole time that disclaimer is playing in the background, you're watching someone living their best life. They're swimming, they're hiking, they've got the dog, they're at the park, they're throwing a frisbee, or they're ascending a mountain, or they're hang gliding, whatever they're doing. They're living their best life, grinning all the way. The funniest ones would be the ones where they had, when they were doing women's tampons. And they were showing women on their period grinning and laughing and having the best time jumping in the pool. You know, so what am I saying? That was his strategy. Forget reality. It's all about you're going to feel better if you own this product. And you need this product. You didn't know it before you saw the commercial, but you actually need it. I don't know how you lived all this time without it. And some of the commercials, they, you know, even have a situation where your neighbor already has it, and that's how you found out. Well, what are you doing? Oh, I just got that today. Now, here's the problem with that. And this is where I get back to the Christianity issue. That's teaching people to covet. See, when you want something that someone else has because you see that they have it, and you want what they have, that's coveting. That's a sin in the Bible. Any Christian knows that. To covet is a sin. You're not supposed to want what someone else has. And not to mention the fact, a lot of what they use as an ad campaign many times is to use women. They use beautiful women in the ad campaign. Well, why are they there? Why is there a beautiful woman, usually dressed kind of sexy, if not all the way sexy, in a commercial that has absolutely nothing to do with a sexy woman? Well, it's because they know that, especially for us men, we covet. And that's something that the Bible strictly tells us not to do. You're not supposed to covet another man's woman. You're not supposed to covet, especially if you're married, but you're not supposed to covet, period. That's a sin. Jesus said, if you even think about having sex with another woman that's not your wife, that's a sin. But capitalism teaches us to covet because they know that type of ad campaign works. And if everybody has the morals that they're supposed to have, they operate by those morals and scruples, then you won't buy as quickly, if at all. And obviously, if you don't buy, then they can't make sales. So in order for them to get the sales that they need, they have to strip away our values. See, there's no other way around that. And it's not an accident that America in particular, more than any other country, has some of the most depraved behavior in our culture. That's not an accident. You know, in other countries, a lot of behavior isn't allowed that is allowed here in America. And it's all done up under the guise of freedom. It's about your freedom and your rights. That's what we're told. But if you're a Christian, you know you don't have the right to sin. There is no right to sin in Christianity. You have the right to choose. You can choose to sin because, you know, no one, God's not going to put you in a headlock, but you don't have the right to sin. But everything is done up under your rights and your freedoms. So if you can't do something, now the question is, oh, my freedoms are being taken away. And if you'll ever notice, everything that has to do with your freedom has to do with something that someone can profit from. There's hardly any freedoms that we have in America that people fight for that someone can't profit off that. There's hardly any. And so, in order to make that work to the advantage of the capitalists, they had to get rid of our inhibitions. And by doing that, Christianity was attacked in several different ways. Now, most people can only relate to taking the prayer out of schools, but it was much more than that. That was just the tip of the iceberg. You look around now, and even the churches don't teach Christianity the way they did when I was growing up. It's not even close. They don't preach sin anymore. They preach, as we all know, prosperity, or you being the best you can be. And you being the best you has nothing to do with you being a better person. It only relates to you being a more successful person. They never preach you being a better you just to help humanity. You're supposed to be a better you so that you can be more successful. I've heard preachers preach from the pulpit. Oh, you know, what kind of life do you want? You know, you just going to work and coming home and paying bills and getting up and going to work and coming home. Didn't you know there's more to life than that? Really? I'll bet someone in a third world country would beg to differ. No, if that's all you get to do, that's not a bad life. It's really not. Compared to being homeless, compared to being a paraplegic. I can think of a lot of things that are a lot worse than just going to work and coming home and going to work and coming home and paying bills. There are a lot of things a lot worse than that. But you're told in the church that if that's all you're doing, you're wasting your life. You're wasting yourself away. You're not living in the abundant life that God has for you. And this abundant life happens to be a life that has to do with material things. Oh, they'll throw in the fact that it's more than that. Oh, it's also health. It's also your spiritual health and, you know, and mentally and family and all that. Yeah, they throw that in to make it sound good. But what they're really focusing on is you being more successful. Because here's the thing. Capitalism is in the church too. And that 10% tithing system is part of it. Because if you're tithing off of, let's say $30,000 a year, but you're going to focus on being the best you, and you go back and you get a higher education, and you really apply yourself and you really push it, and you end up getting six figures. So you go from 30 to 100. Well, it doesn't take a mathematician to figure that 10% of 100,000 is going to be a lot greater than 10% of 30,000. Why do you think they want you to be the best you? It's like I said, it has nothing to do with humanity. It has nothing to do with you helping your fellow man. I mean, sure, they'll have programs that you can get in where you can maybe, you know, be a mentor if you're a guy or whoever, you know, to some younger kids. They got some programs for you. I'm not going to say they don't do anything that's helpful to the community. That would be a lie if I said that. Some churches do. Some churches have outreach programs. They help poor people, homeless people, people in need, different situations. But that's not the focus point. The focal point is you become the best you so that you can tithe bigger and give your offerings. Because, it's tithe and offerings. The offering's kind of like a tip. So there's that. But the main thing is, as I said before, is that they had to lower our inhibitions, meaning even Christianity itself had to be, what would be a better word for it? Diminished, I guess, in some respects, because strict Christianity would not allow us to do a lot of things that we do. And coveting is number one. The other thing is materialism. The Bible speaks against materialism. Well, every ad campaign you see, whether it's on TV, on your phone, on some platform, wherever you see a commercial, it's materialism. That's all it is. You sell them. I mean, you may see a commercial every now and then about, joining somebody's church or, some organization that's helping people. But for the most part, as well as I do, 99.9% of what you're going to see in the form of advertising has to do with materialism. So you're getting materialism preached to you. And we're participating in that. If you're participating in that type of business, then this is what you're doing. And the Bible strictly talks about not being materialistic, not putting things in front of people, that there's nothing more important than people. But now we're living in a time where things are more important than people. People get shot over things. And by the way, for people who love to talk about how Biden said so many things before he ever became president, that they dug up in the past that he said about black people and this, that, and the third. Don't forget, the president that you're defending, that you love now, President Trump, his famous saying was, when he was at, I believe it was one of his, I think it was one of his debates or one of his rallies, one. He said, and talking about rioting, and let's be honest, if he's talking about rioting, who is he really talking about? Most people don't associate rioting with anybody other than people of color. Just like most people don't usually relate mass shootings with anything other than a white male. Not saying that other people can't do it, but we know 9 times out of 10 that's who that's going to be. So rioting is typically, if you're talking about rioting, you're talking about people of color. And he said, and I quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." That was his saying. That came out of his mouth. Nobody put that in his mouth. It wasn't edited down to mean something else. That's exactly what he meant. He said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That was his answer to how he was going to deal with, I guess, any type of protest that broke into a riot, Black Lives Matter, etc. Well, that's valuing things over people. If you're going to shoot somebody over something, a thing, that's valuing things over people. And yeah, and I understand nobody wants anything taken from them. It makes anybody furious to think that someone worked for something and they strive for it and they did all the right things and now somebody's just come along and take it. Yeah, I get that. Nobody likes that. But when you're valuing things over people, you're getting into dangerous territory. You're getting into a territory now where you can no longer say you're talking about Christianity anymore. You can't find anywhere in the Bible where Jesus ever valued things over people. You just can't. And then the other part of the other thing about capitalism is the meritocracy part and how that plays in with religion. Because, again, Jesus didn't teach that. Now, someone will come back and say, well, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. Jesus didn't say that. Now, it is in the Bible, but Jesus didn't say it. And what you have to understand is there were a lot of things that were said in the Bible that Jesus did not agree with on some level. There are some things that he took even further. As I said before about the whole thing about adultery, when he was disputing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees or whoever it was he was debating with about adultery, he took it further than they took it. He said, if a man so much as even looks at a woman with lust in his heart, he's committed adultery already. Meaning, you haven't even touched this woman. But if you've undressed her and you've had sex with her in your mind, you're guilty of adultery. That's what Jesus said. So, what did Jesus say about meritocracy? Well, I seem to remember Jesus feeding 5,000 people. If you remember that, he had the Sermon on the Mount, 5,000 people, and they had served people with fish and loaves of bread, and they ran out. And when his disciples told him that they ran out of food, he told them to lay the baskets down, and he filled them back up, and they finished feeding the rest of the people. Nowhere in that did Jesus say, well, if they didn't work, they shouldn't eat. I'm not out here just giving away fish dinners. Do they got any money? What do they think this is? Welfare? Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said, put the baskets down, he filled them back up, and he fed them. So that, meritocracy, that is a man-made concept that has everything to do with people working for other people. It's not really about you working for yourself, because if you ever notice, even Christians, if you meet someone and you don't know them, if the conversation gets far enough, they may ask you what you do, or usually they ask you where you work. Have you ever had anyone ask you, do you own your own business? Does anybody ever start a conversation with that? What business do you own? No, they're going to ask you, where do you work? And where do you work means, who do you work for? Because if you own your own business, you're not working for somebody. You're working for yourself. And we know that. So no one ever asked you, does this person have a business? They ask, do you have a job? That's the first thing they want to know. When I was selling cars, and I used to do the credit apps for people, there was a line there for how many jobs you had and for how many years. I didn't see anything down there about how many businesses you had and for how many years. Now, obviously, if you only had business, that's the only thing you could put on the credit app, but that wasn't what they were looking for. And you were not as likely to get a line of credit depending on if you were self-employed, because they didn't have anybody to really go after to say, hey, can you vouch for this person? You're just vouching for yourself. So you have to understand, that is what this is all about at the end of the day. It's about a class system of where people are supposed to be mostly workers and mostly in debt, because that's the only way that they can keep people under control and make the system work the way they need it to work. When I was, like I said, I've been in sales and retail for years, and I spoke to a lot of different vendors because I used to have to check in vendors all the time. And one of them told me, I won't mention, of course, mention the name of the company, but he told me that one of the things that they would do that he didn't like in the company was if someone had bought a new car or bought a house. Oh, they got all kind of attaboys. They all kind of there you go. There you go. And and the reason for it was they knew, now we got you. We got you now. Now we can talk real good and crazy to you because we know you got to make those payments. You got to make that new car payment. You got to make that new house payment. Or your kids just went to college. Or you got to send them money. We know we got you. Whereas if you didn't own anything and you weren't in debt, they really had no control over you. They had very little control over you. If they fired you, you could just go work for somebody else. It was no big deal. You know, you didn't have those type of obligations that would keep you under their thumb. And so, you know, that puts a completely different light on these freedoms and rights that you have. Yeah, you have the freedom. You have freedom. You have the freedom to be in debt, and you have the freedom to work for someone else. You have total freedom to do that. But when you try to walk outside of that, that's when you'll find out that you don't have as much freedom as you thought you did. Because that's not the way the system is set up. And Christians, in my opinion, should be more aware of that than anyone. Because again, you've got a lot of businesses that if they had not lowered our inhibitions, wouldn't even be in business today. Fast food industry is one of them. What does fast food industry really represent at the end of the day? It represents the division of the family unit. Because when I was growing up, we didn't have fast food restaurants on every corner. We had very few to choose from, very few. And going to one of them wasn't a daily thing. It was like, you know, weekly or monthly. It was a treat. It wasn't routine. There was no drive-through windows where you just drive through and keep going and, you know, and go down. There was none of that. So what we did and what the average family in America did was you had family dinner time. You had the family at the dinner table. And during that period of time, that was a one time when family got together and you would discuss the day, and the parents could kind of catch up with what the kids were doing, and there was a bonding that took place during that time. Now, because of the fast food industry, it's a grab and go. You don't necessarily have, I mean, you can go home and still have your traditional dinners. Nobody's saying that you can't. And I'm sure there's families that still do, but there's a lot of grab and go. That's the whole purpose of it. You know, everything's convenient so that you don't have to interrupt your day for anything, not even to have dinner at home. You can just grab it and go and go on about your way and do whatever you do. And so all that's been diminished now. And it seems like you look at things like that and you say, oh, well, that's not a big deal, but it's a bigger deal than you think. It's a bigger deal than you think. Because again, a lot of bonding went on during that time. The same thing with the family breakfast. If you were able to do that. And that's grab and go now. So lunch is always was pretty much grab and go because you were at work. Now breakfast is grab and go. Now dinner is grab and go. So where's the bonding time at? And then the rest of the time you're on your phones. And who does all that benefit? It benefits capitalism. It doesn't benefit people because that does not bring people together more. It does not help us come together more. It doesn't help us in any way to be better people. I'm not a better person because now I don't have, dinner around the family table. You could argue maybe I wouldn't be anyway, but I beg to differ. Because all those things that seemed like they weren't a big deal, now that we don't have them, look at how we're living. Look at the results. Look at the distance between families now and the lack of bonding that goes on in families. Look how fast our children leave us. I mean, they were going to do it anyway. When kids turn to teenagers and even preteens, they tend to start, running more with their peers and having less to do with the parents. That's a natural order of things. But it's even more that now. That's even more the case. That happens even earlier and to a greater degree. And it's because we're having a lot less things to bond over now. And more things to divide us. And the bottom line is, if we were to go back to those family values that we had, that we've abandoned, they'd be out of business. Because they're geared for us to be there all the time. That's, before COVID, especially, some of those businesses were 24-hour. Or at least late at night. Taco Bell always was, I can remember, late at night. But some of them were 24-hour. There were 24-hour McDonald's. And they got to drive through. So you don't even have to, you don't want to come in, you don't want to have to dress or whatever. Just drive through and get it, grab and go. Well, if we did what we used to do, where we ate mostly at home, out of the refrigerator and the stove, they go out of business in no time. In no time. If we were to eat based on health, they could be out of business in no time. So they had to take all that away from you. They had to take all that away from us in order to sell us. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Same thing with the clothing industry. Can you even imagine what the clothing industry would be like if we were to go back to when I was growing up, I only had just a few clothes. I had school clothes and I had play clothes. My play clothes were usually clothes that looked too bad to wear to school. So it didn't matter if I got them messed up playing. I didn't have a whole bunch of shoes. There was no designer shoes. There were no designer jeans. There was none of that. And if you had on a nice outfit, usually that meant you were going somewhere, you were getting ready to do something. That wasn't something you wore on a daily basis unless you had a job that required you to dress professional. But if you were a blue collar worker, you usually didn't wear those kind of clothes. Your parents didn't, and the kids didn't wear expensive clothes. Look at the clothing industry now. Again, if we were to go back to those values, they'd be out of business. They'd be totally out of business. So they had to make you covet all these things that you don't need and make you feel like you have the right and the freedom to have these things so that they could increase their sales. Because at the end of the day, they need us more than we need them. And you know what I call that? I call that making stone soup. this is where I'm going to end this one. I didn't really cover everything I wanted to cover, but I usually never do. But I will be back. Again, please hit the like or subscribe button. I appreciate it. And leave a comment, because I really would like to know what you think. Appreciate it. Until next time.